So, welcome everyone, and I want to thank you for coming. I'm Grace Van Mill, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's Lunch and Learn on behalf of MCIC, the Manitoba Council for International Cooperation. You can see David, our guest speaker, up here is on video as well, and I'll be introducing him soon. But as we begin, I wanted to acknowledge, excuse me, I wanted to acknowledge that I'm hosting this event from Winnipeg, in Treaty 1 territory, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and we're on the homeland of the Métis Nation. So I encourage you to learn more about and to acknowledge the traditional territories that you're joining us from today, and to consider how we can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation, wherever we are. So we're grateful for the chance to host this event, and we want to thank you for joining. So a quick note for those who may not have joined us online before, we're doing this webinar style. So you'll be able to see the speakers, but not other participants, and no one will be able to see you. We do have a Q&A section set up, so feel free to upload your questions there. David, if I could just ask you to advance to the Q&A slide, that would be great. So if you can see on the screen in just a minute, David's going to put up, if you hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to see the Q&A box at the bottom. If you click that, you can enter your questions, and you'll be able to enter your questions, and we'll ask those to David at the end. You can put them in the chat as we go along, but we do have quite a few people registered, so it'll be more manageable if you put it in the Q&A. We may also be launching one or two poll questions, asking questions of you during the presentation. So today I just thought we'd get started by asking where you're all joining from today. Apologies, that should say today, not tonight. Yeah, so please just let me know where you're joining from, and we'll get a sense of where people are. So I see quite a few people joining from Winnipeg, some from another province.
I'm sorry, I'm not advancing the slides, Grace. Am I doing something? This worked this morning.
Why don't I start the presentation and we'll fix that. So we do have quite a few people joining from Winnipeg and other provinces. So welcome to everyone who's joining. I'm just going to take 1 second to set up the presentation, and then we'll start this again. Just 1 sec. Okay, so everyone should be able to see the PowerPoint screen. David, you can just nod if you can see the PowerPoint. That would be great. Okay, so for those of you who might be less familiar with MCIC, we're a council of about 40 organizations working in international development around the world. We also engage Manitobans on global issues, such as the work you're going to hear about today. So this event is sponsored in part by funding from Global Affairs Canada, and we're grateful for their support. We often host events like this, so please do sign up for our e-newsletter if you'd like to hear about upcoming events. Or you can follow us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and you will receive a link after this webinar to sign up for our e-newsletter. So I hope you've all got your lunches ready to go, as I'd now like to introduce our speaker, David Bruer. So David, who you can see on the screen here, lived and worked in Guatemala for 8 years before returning to Canada in 2002 to work with Interpares on the Latin America program. Starting in 2007, he shifted to work with partners in Asia, in Bangladesh, India, and the Philippines. So with an academic background in environmental science, he has approached social justice issues from many perspectives over the years. I know we're all looking forward to hearing more about how Interpares has worked with the group Nijera Kori in their work with poor and landless population of rural villages in Bangladesh. And as David told me, fighting entrenched power structures and the patriarchy is a long-term process, but there are exciting advances being made, especially in these projects on women's rights, as we're going to hear more about today. So please join me in welcoming David. And to do that, I encourage you to put a plus sign in the chat as applause. David, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll just get you to unmute your microphone, and then let me know when you need me to move to the next slide on your presentation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Grace. Thank you to the Manitoba Council for International Cooperation and to all of you for joining here today. I assure you that this morning I could make these slides go back and forth and do all sorts of things. I'm not sure what happened. I wanted to begin just by acknowledging we're in the middle of a COVID pandemic. And so keep that in mind in terms of, while I go through the presentation, you're going to see a lot of photos of people jammed together as the one you see on your screen right now in very unsocial distancing manners. What I'm talking about is the program as it's existed over the past couple of years. And I think there have been a lot of impacts because of the pandemic. It's something, we want to talk about in the question and answer period, but I'd really like to focus on what's been going on for the past 30 or 40 years in terms of the work of Nijera Kori. So let me start by introducing inter pares a little bit. So if I could have the next slide. We go back to 1975. We're a very small team, as you can see in the photo there. That's all of us. We're 15 or 16 people, depending on how hiring goes. And we don't define ourselves as an international development NGO. We have always thought of ourselves, first of all, as a feminist organization, secondly, as a social justice organization. So we have no overseas staff. So I may go and visit Nijera Kori in Bangladesh, but we don't have any staff managing our project with Nijera Kori. We're a flat structure, which, well, what does that mean? It means that we all make the same salary. We co-manage the organization. We take our decisions by consensus. And part of that is we spend a lot of time in meetings. Not now. Now we have Zoom meetings. But that's life, adapting to pandemics. We don't tell our partners in the Global South what to do. We share with them an analysis that poverty and marginalization are the result of injustice and inequality within countries and among countries. And they're the experts in terms of dealing with that and knowing how to address it. Our job is to work in solidarity with them. Can I have the next slide? So our relationship with Nijera Kori goes right back to 1980 when Nijera Kori was formed, and not too long after Inter Pares was formed. So as you can see, we form long-term relationships with organizations in the Global South and here in Canada. We have supported, for example, the National Farmers Union for several decades. We have supported Food Secure Canada, the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group, a lot of Canadian organizations, the Canadian Health Coalition in defense of public health care in Canada. We see our job as being working for social justice here in Canada and supporting organizations in the Global South that are working for those same social justice ideals. So as you can see, we share that analysis with Nijera Kori. I go back to 2002 with Inter Pares. When I've talked to some of the people who founded it, they tell me that Kushi Kabir, who's the coordinator of Nijera Kori, was the woman who pushed Inter Pares into the flat structure and into becoming a feminist organization. And so where is all of this located? I don't know how much people know about Bangladesh. I'm not going to do a history of it or anything. But it is a relatively new country. It used to be East Pakistan and fought a war of liberation in 1971. And country about a fifth the size of Manitoba, with 160 million people. It has one of the fastest growing economies in all of Asia and all of the world right now. However, that wealth is not very well distributed. It's something like 145th out of 180 in terms of corruption by the Transparency International group. And the majority of people, despite the garment industry, some other growing industries in Bangladesh, still depend on agriculture and are still in the villages. It's a majority Muslim country, and one of the big sources of income in Bangladesh is migrant labor, and a big destination for migrant labor from Bangladesh is the Persian Gulf, the Arab Gulf countries. One of the results of that is a lot of money flowing back into Bangladesh tied to Islamic fundamentalist movements. So it's problematic in terms of the rights of women and people's ability to maintain a secular state. Let's go on to the next slide. So Nijera Kori means, if you translate it literally into English, we do it ourselves. And the idea of Nijera Kori is working with the poorest, the most marginalized part of the population, people who don't have land, who sell their labor, work as landless laborers, and to form groups. So you form a group in a village, 20, 25 people, usually either a women's group or a men's group. As the groups progress over the years, sometimes those groups will merge, but usually it's because it is such a patriarchal culture. It's really hard to mix men's groups and women's groups, and the men would dominate. And so the women's groups are normally separate. Nijera Kori has a lot of people. You saw on the map back there, the areas that they're in. So it's not all of the country, but it's a lot of the departments of the country. Almost 11,000 of these groups in almost 1,200 villages. So well over 200,000 landless group members in the whole of Nijera Kori. So that's a lot of people. And that's a lot of people going through training, learning about their rights, and learning how to demand the implementation of those rights. They're a very democratic organization, both Nijera Kori and the landless groups. So there are annual assemblies, people are elected to positions. One of the big challenges in that has been for women to progress through that, to run for office both within the organizations, within the landless group structures, within the staff of Nijera Kori, and even beyond that, to run for local office in some of the local elections for education committees, for market committees. So that's a process that is going on. There's been tremendous progress made in that. Women have taken more and more of a leadership role as time goes on. And this is, I think I'll probably say this a number of times through this presentation, but social change is a long-term process. We've been working with Nijera Kori since 1980, so 40 years. There's been tremendous advances in that time, but it's not as though you do a project, you calculate what your results are going to be according to the Global Affairs Canada results framework, and then that's it. You achieve it, you pull out, you end. We think that processes are longer term, and we make that commitment to Nijera Kori to be there for the long term, and we have, and will continue to be. So can I have the next slide? So what is it they do? I've tried to sum it up on the slides, that it's essentially a rights-based approach and a social mobilization approach. And that's what we're talking about in this presentation. And you can get an idea in the photograph there of the numbers of people and the power of social mobilization. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of men and women gathered together to say, we know what our rights are and we are demanding that our rights be fulfilled. So within the Nijera Kori has field offices, quite a lot of them. They have field staff who live and work in the field and accompany the landless groups. And sometimes that involves providing training. Sometimes it means just going to the weekly landless group meetings, helping people analyze things, answering questions, finding information when they don't have it. It's a process of accompaniment. And it's about learning your rights and then demanding your rights as citizens, and then holding authorities accountable and using the power that you have and the numbers that you've got to hold local authorities accountable for things. It's always on working together, building that sense of community, helping each other. Can I have the next slide? So this picture is an example of that. One of the things that Nijera Kori and the landless groups have done is to hold what they call public audits. So this was a public audit of a government employment program where they came and they said, we've got X number of days of paid employment to help the poor people in this part of Bangladesh. And you come, well, we're going to be paying this much per day. And there was a tremendous amount of corruption on the part of the local officials running it. So people who were not poor were on the list of people who had worked for this program and got the money. They didn't work. They didn't get, but they got the pay when it came around to it. There was a lot of discrimination against women in the program. Women were paid less than men, even though they weren't supposed to be. There were supposed to be conditions for childcare for the women. It didn't happen. So the landless groups carried out an audit of the whole program. They used access to information. They filed requests, they got information, they got lists of people who had been paid. They went and interviewed people in the villages and said, the list says you worked. Did you work? Did you get paid? So they verified all that information. And so this woman is standing up in front of the local officials, in front of a panel of judges from civil society and thousands of landless group members saying, I was on the list. Nobody told me I was even on the list. I didn't get paid. this is an example of the corruption we're facing. So that's the kind of accountability that they're able to do by mobilizing the numbers. There are committees, what they call watch committees within the landless group structures. They monitor the schools. One of the big problems in state schools in Bangladesh is the teachers don't show up. Or the teachers will sell the textbooks that are supposed to be provided for free. Or the government has a subsidy program for poor students, but all of a sudden you find that the rich kids are on the subsidy program and it's going to them and not the poor kids. There's so many examples within the healthcare where, and I've seen this myself, you find medicines that are supposed to be provided free in the clinics, they're on sale. They're being sold in the local market because the medical staff have sold them to people in the market to sell. All of those things are accountability. And the landless groups first learn what their rights are and then mobilize to demand that their rights are implemented. Can I have the next slide? One of the big issues in Bangladesh is violence against women. If you look at all the statistics, it has one of the highest rates of child marriage. It has one of the, I think the last study by the United Nations found that over 50% of women above 18 had reported intimate partner violence during the last year. It's a pretty horrible situation. And it's not something that's going to change quickly. Bangladesh has very good laws. That's not an issue, really. It's that the laws are ignored or they're not enforced. So the landless groups are looking at this and saying, well, we know that this is going on. We know that child marriage is illegal, but it's still happening. We know that you are not allowed to have 3, 4, and 5 wives. We know that harassment is supposed to be, that there was another law in Bangladesh passed around sexual harassment. So that the laws are there, but it's a matter of how do you get them enforced? So social mobilization says you protest when you find those cases. You know what's going on in your village and you take action to make sure that those things are getting stopped. So when the landless group find cases of child marriage, the first thing they would do is go and talk to the parents and say, try to reason with them and say, this is really not what should be happening. It's not legal. You shouldn't be marrying your daughter off at the age of 13 or 14. If that doesn't work, well, then they protest, and they protest to demand that the police act to stop that, or that the elders in the village act to stop that. So you can see some of the achievements. These are from last year. So they stopped 60 child marriages. They stopped 22 cases of bigamy. One of the, I'll get to this a little bit later, but rape cases, which should not go to local conflict resolution processes. And sometimes so that's one of the things they do. I'll get to that in the next slide, I think. But tremendous success, though. 535 of 568 protests that the landless group carried out, they succeeded in getting their demands. You can stop one person and you can ignore them, but when you get a crowd like that coming at you, it's a lot harder to ignore. It's a lot harder to just say, oh, don't worry about it. That's the power of the social mobilization that the landless groups have. Can I have the next slide? So one of the things that they've done is the legal system is usually only used by rich people. What Nijera Kori has done with the landless groups is they've done the training to explain what the laws are, and they've made the legal system accessible to poor people. So as an individual, it'd be very difficult to launch a case on something, but as a landless group, they have their group savings. They meet every week. They all contribute a little bit of money that goes into their savings. They manage that money. They can pay lawyers. They can pay to launch some of these cases themselves. And the only time Nijera Kori would get involved is if it was very high profile, if it was a case against the mayor or the equivalent to, higher profile political figure. But the landless groups have really used to learn that system. So last year, 36 cases on violence against women were filed by the landless groups themselves. And they continue to win those cases. So they've learned to use that system. Can I have the next slide? This is what I was referring to before. Shalish is a traditional conflict resolution system in the villages. And it's, as you could expect, in a way, dominated by the wealthy, by men. When a conflict in the village comes up, historically, the legal system was something that existed in the capital city. It's not out in the villages. People would resolve their own conflicts, and then the elders would get together. They would listen to both sides. They would make a ruling, and people would abide by that. I mean, it's in many ways a good system, and I think Canada is a very lawyer-heavy country, and we could use a dose of this maybe. The trouble is when you start, one, as I said, if the men are dominating the situation, well, the system, then you really don't get justice in many cases. And also, some things you can't resolve in a conflict resolution system. If there is a case of rape, that needs to go to the legal system. It doesn't, that's a criminal offense. I mean, if you're talking about some other things, some land disputes, or the case of harassment of a woman, harassment of female students, those are things that you may be able to deal with at the village level. So the landless groups have taken this system and really started to use it. And one, they
Hi, everyone. David seems to have lost internet briefly, so we'll just give him a chance to sign back in and then we'll keep going. So we'll just give him one more second to see what's going on his side with the internet, and then we'll come back in. So please just hang on 1 second and we'll see what happens. Okay, thanks. Okay, everyone. I think David has been able to successfully rejoin, so we'll just
I
give him a
think I'm
minute
back.
to restart his video. Okay, David, you're good to go.
I'm good to, okay. I'm sorry, where did I cut out? Well, I'm going to assume that you heard what I was saying about Shalish and
Yeah, we heard the beginning. Just your final thoughts on this page, I think.
okay. So just to say this, the example I put there is to demonstrate sort of the practical value of this for people in the villages, that men who don't pay allowances to their family once they've divorced, for example, that's a very common thing that would be taken to the Shalish system. And they've helped 1,500 women to recover that maintenance allowance from their husband. So these are really practical benefits for women that come out of mobilizing to use this system. So can I have the next slide then? So part of what Nijera Kori does is they want to educate other people. It's not just a process of educating within the landless groups, but culture, song. Bangladesh is a very, culture is very valued. Part of the reason for the liberation war from Pakistan was that Pakistan was trying to impose Urdu as their language on the whole of Bangladesh. And Bangladesh speaks Bengali, and this was a horrible affront. I mean, how can you just tell everybody they should speak a different language? Languages and culture are very, very important.
Apologies, everyone. We seem to be having some internet trouble in Ontario where David is joining us from. So I'm just going to give him a minute to sign in again, and I'll see if I can problem solve with him behind the scenes. Really sorry, everyone. Let's just hold tight for 30 seconds and we should have it sorted out. Thanks.
Hi, it's my connection. I'm so sorry. I I think I'm connected again.
David, you're on the screen. We can see you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Can I? Can I get the next slide then, because the time is going on. So a big focus of the work for women's rights has been focused on youth. Girls, boys grow up with the very sexist and patriarchal attitudes that they get from their parents, that they get from the village they live in. And it's a long process to change that, to make sure that that girls learn that they do have rights, that they can go to school, that they don't, that child marriage is something they shouldn't be facing, that they can move freely in their village and don't necessarily have to wear hijab. So all of that is something that Nijera Kori has paid a lot of attention to increasingly over the years. Sports is a big part of that. Forming girls soccer teams. Soccer is king in, or queen in Bangladesh. And so it's very popular. And even the girls teams, because people love soccer so much, they're willing to overlook the fact that they may not think that the girls should be playing it. So it's a way to say to girls, look, these are things you can do. To say to the village, girls should be able to do this. You need to change your attitudes towards the role of women in society and the role of girls. They need to go to school. They need to be able to move around. So there's been a lot of that done over the past couple of years, and you can see some of what we have a new project with Global Affairs Canada, which has just started, which will be focused on sexual and reproductive health issues. And that's something that simply doesn't happen in the school system. And it's something that we and Nijera Kori think does need to begin to be talked about and introduced as a topic within the landless groups and within the villages. Can I have the next slide? Just as an example of this, the young woman you see there, Sanjita Akhtar, is, I guess she's now in grade 11, assuming school starts. She's an amazing young woman, and she's an example of coming out of the landless groups. Her parents have been in the landless groups for most of their lives. She was raised in that. She is an activist. And so she knows that child marriage is happening. She sees the harassment of female students in the schools. So she formed a committee in her school. She got some of her friends together. And when they hear about a child marriage case, they take action. They try and stop it. They go try and talk to the parents. They go, and they are looking at the harassment that happens as girls walk to school. They're confronting the guys who are doing it. They're denouncing this. They're making complaints. So there were 7 committees like that were formed by youth last year. It's really exciting to see that stuff. She's an amazing young woman, and I think that's the future. We're going to have more and more of that as we go. And I think, if I'm not wrong, I think that is the last slide. I want to end on something really positive. And Sanjita, for me, I've met her a couple times, and she's a dynamo, and she knows her rights, and she's dedicated her life and got friends together to really push on those issues. And they're doing it really successfully. So, I mean, for me, that kind of sums up the whole approach that Nijera Kori has taken. You know, educate people about their rights so that they begin to demand the fulfillment of those rights, and they mobilize for those rights to be implemented. And we've seen it with the parents, and now we're seeing it with another generation of the children of the landless group members. And it's exciting work. I have to say this is one of my favorite relationships that Enterprise has around the world. So next slide. And there we go, another picture of some of the amazing women in the landless groups. Thank you very much. I apologize for the internet connections, I hope.
No problem. So David, thanks so much. That was really interesting. I know we're already starting to get questions in. So I'll just move it to the next slide for those who haven't entered questions before. This is what you're looking for. Hover your mouse on the bottom of the screen, hit the Q&A box, and you can enter your questions. So I'll just leave this up for a minute while you do that. David, I thought I'd start off with a question for me. I'm interested, you know, you spoke about how long this work has been going on and the sort of partnership you have with Nijera Kori. Wondering if you can summarize from your own opinion, what's one of the more powerful lessons to come from this work with Nijera Kori over the years? What's something you'd say we need to know about this work? What's a really key lesson we can take away?
Well, I would argue that things take time. Social processes take time. We know that sexism and patriarchal systems are not, you know, it's not unique in any way to Bangladesh. We've got it here in Canada too. But it's tough to change those systems, and it means that you have to take a long-term approach to things and get away from the idea that you write a short project and you say, we're going to change the patriarchal system in country X in a 3-year project. And this is something that you have to be in for the long haul. And I think Nijera Kori and Enterprise really are. We've got a long relationship. We feed into each other. They've come to Canada, we go there. But I think we learn as much from them as they learn from us.
For sure. Okay, we have some questions from attendees. So someone wants to know, you know, what are some of the biggest challenges that Interparas and your partners face with respect to building women's knowledge about their rights? So for example, any sources of resistance, and how do you overcome those? So what are some of the biggest challenges that you face with respect to building women's knowledge about their rights?
I think in Bangladesh, one of the biggest, and unfortunately I would have to say it's growing, is that the religious fundamentalism in Bangladesh is growing. It's becoming stronger. Political parties are linked to Islamic fundamentalist movements, and that plays out right down to the village level, where you have very strong messages coming from people, and Islamists shaming people, telling them that if their daughter goes to school, or if their daughter doesn't get married, or if she leaves the house without a male accompanier, that this is a great sin. Those messages are just becoming more and more common. And so to push back against that as a secular organization, as a women's rights organization, is just becoming increasingly hard. Not to say that Nijera Kori or Enterprise are going to stop, but it's the context is becoming more and more difficult, for sure.
Okay, thanks, David. It sounds like, yeah, some really unique challenges going on there. Someone's asking, are there any measures being taken for the safety and security of the girls and women who are doing this sort of rights activism work, like Sanjita?
Well, I think the safety of all of the people within the landless group movement is basically the power of numbers. If somebody goes after Sanjita, she knows that in her village there are 11 landless groups, and they can mobilize very quickly to take action, either to protect her, to demand justice for her. That's the protection measure, I guess. The head of the coordinator of Nijera Kori is a woman by the name of Kushi Kabir, and she is a very, very well-known activist in Bangladesh. And I think, to be honest, her name, she's in the media a lot. She provides another level of protection. She's able to denounce things in the national media in a way that other people couldn't. So that, I would say that's another protection.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I'm just looking through some of the questions here. Someone's asking if there are specific ways that you, or I suppose maybe you know that Nijera Kori works with Sanjita and other activists to make sure you're not continuing the cycles of power dynamics. And another question about, yeah, well, we'll stop there. There's multiple questions in one question.
Okay, sorry. So
they're just wondering, how do you manage the work, or how does Nijera Kori manage the work of working with these activists to make sure that when you're doing that, you're not reinforcing some of these negative power dynamics that may exist? If you know the answer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, first of all, I just want to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, that we, it's not my job to go over to Bangladesh and tell Nijera Kori, hey, you're replicating power, bad power dynamics, or you're doing, your methodology is wrong. They are the experts. They know what the power dynamics are in the villages. They know what they are between men and women. And I trust them to know how to address those power dynamics and not replicate them in the work they do. They know that even within their own organization, Nijera Kori's got a staff of about, at this point, say 240 people. There are men and women. There are issues of patriarchal structures, although Kushi Kabir, as a strong woman, as the head of the organization, that doesn't mean that you've automatically eliminated all patriarchal power structures within Nijera Kori. And so they struggle with that, and they very much try to promote women within the structures of Nijera Kori. They try to promote women within the structures of the landless groups. But they would be the first to say, we haven't finished, we haven't won, we haven't accomplished all that we're trying to do. So I think that's an ongoing struggle about.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for that. There's a question. Someone is asking if there's any government intervention towards women's activities. For example, the example about corruption influencing the programs.
Well, the government, the two main political leaders in Bangladesh for the past several decades have been, are women. Sheikh Hasina is the prime minister. That doesn't necessarily result in an awful lot in terms of government measures to push women's rights or to end patriarchal structures. The government has programs, they have some good programs, but as I was saying, I think the problem is implementation, enforcement. So in response to one of the really egregious cases of sexual harassment, sexual violence against a university student, the Supreme Court said every educational institution has to have a sexual harassment committee in the school. Well, nobody did it. One of the things the landless groups did was to start monitoring their schools, as they do, and say, hey, the law says you've got to have a sexual harassment committee. You don't have it. Let's form it. So the government does some good things. It's the follow through. And I think that's where the social mobilization really contributes to getting things implemented.
Yeah, so the strength of mobilizing these groups is that they can hold governments and authorities to account.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, well, we need to do some of that here too.
Absolutely.
Someone else is asking, are there any partnerships, or what are the partnerships between media groups and the activists? I'm not sure, that might be something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Nijera Kori has contacts in media. There are hundreds of newspapers in Bangladesh, as you can imagine, a country of 160 million. There are many, many, many television channels, many radio stations. A lot of them are not very progressive. Nijera Kori tries to form alliances with progressive journalists, and there are some, and they can get stories out. One of the kind of scary laws that was passed recently by this government was around the media, and it basically said, to paraphrase, hurting the feelings of a government official is a criminal offense. It basically gives carte blanche to the government to shut down the media, to arrest people for fictitious offenses. So if you are critical of Sheikh Hasina, you can be arrested. So it's a really difficult situation vis-a-vis the media.
Yeah, wow. Sounds like it. Thanks for sharing all that information. We do have someone asking, about next steps, how they can support the initiative or learn more about women's rights. So I just wanted to put in the chat a link that David sent me just before we started. Or maybe David, if you could put it in the chat, the link to the video sharing a bit more about what Nijera Kori does. And I want to thank you, David, for everything you've shared so far. I think we've had some really excellent questions and discussion today, despite a few technical difficulties. So I just want to say thank you again to David. And if you enjoyed this presentation, we invite you to join us on September 24th for our next Local Brews and Global Views, which is a discussion series we're hosting online. Next up is a speaker from CUSO International sharing about a girls' education program in Ethiopia. So if you sign up for our e-newsletter, you'll receive updates about these upcoming events, like our upcoming Walk the Talk series here in Manitoba, or you can watch our social media for more information. You'll receive an email after this event ends with a short survey asking about the Lunch and Learn today. Please share your feedback with us. And there will also be a link to sign up for our e-newsletter and to register for our next event. So I invite you to please put some plus signs in the chat if you enjoyed today's talk, and that'll be an applause for David. And I will paste that link if David hasn't yet in just a minute. So I wanted to thank you, David, for everything you shared, and everyone for attending. I hope you managed to eat your lunch and learn something while we were meeting today. So have a great afternoon.